So we've had a few days to digest the 2026 budget now, and we need to get the perspective of market players, and they are on PM Express tonight. A few things that last week when we assembled the market players, we talked about that we were looking forward to. At the time, it was rumored that the finance minister was indeed going to keep his promise of reforming VAT. Yes, he did so. We know the specifics now, but how is the market reacting to this, and how is this affecting businesses? We're going to measure that tonight. A few things that we know the finance minister did last week was to abolish the COVID-19 levy. He says 3.7 billion cedis is now going to come to your pocket in 2026 that would have otherwise been taken away because of that particular tax. But what does that mean for businesses? And then Get Fund and NHR has been decoupled. You're talking about the no VAT on prospecting, and that will be good for the mining sector. Government wants to boost that particular sector. Of course, in the bigger global scheme of gold prices soaring pretty high, you see why government wants to do that. This is the time to encourage more prospecting, potentially finding more discoveries, etc. Now, VAT registration threshold has been increased. And that, by the way, is an interesting one, because if you listen to Guta, they had concerns there, and they were already signaling that they were hoping that this threshold will not be one that will disadvantage others within the same market. I'm interested to hear their views now that this has been done today, whether indeed it was done in a way that does not discriminate as far as the marketplace is concerned. Overall, the effective VAT rate is dropped from 21.9 to 20%. Now, some watchers say it should have gone to 19%. The finance minister was here with me last week, and I put this to him, and he says, well, this is a start. They're going to be monitoring this, and over time, if there's a need to review this a bit further, they will. I'll pull that to my guests when they join me for a conversation. This is about how this affects businesses. But I'm also interested in, because of the more money in the pockets of businesses, the review of the taxes, scrapping others, this will obviously make businesses thrive and will have a bit more money available. They should be expanding, but will they also reduce their prices? If you box that, for example, with the appreciation of the city, will we see that? They will tell me how you can benefit from this. If the businesses are benefiting, I expect to benefit also, right? So we would ask them. Now, so what would this mean in reality? Let's take 1,000 cedis, right? For a 1,000 CD purchase, what I've just talked about that happened last week and announced by the finance minister, what would that mean in reality? If you netted all off, before the restructure of the VAT, you would have been paying 1,219. That is if you bought something that cost 1,000 cedis. After this has been done and Parliament approves it, you're not going to be spending and paying 1,200. So 19 cedis is gone. So cumulatively, the more you purchase, the more you save on the back of the restructuring that has been done. That's what we know as far as the breakdown is concerned. But we'll ask the businesses themselves, how are they computing this into their businesses going forward? Talking about the 2025 revenue, we know that there's a shortfall there. The finance that told us that some 3.5 billion was projected in terms of the projected shortfall for revenue. So revenues, they need to break that gap somehow. 2026, revenue and expenditure. And this part is interesting. I'll ask the technical advisor to the finance minister who's joining us tonight on this. Revenue is 268.1 billion. Expenditure is 302 billion. So you have a deficit of 64.2 billion that will need to finance somewhat. We'll tell you how the finance ministry is planning to spend this. Now, this is simple. Let's do the home economics, right? At home, if you spend more than you earn, you're going to have a deficit. But the question to ask is, how does this compare to what we've known in the past? And are we reducing and shrinking our benefits over the period? Or are we expanding it? And that's one of the things we wanted to check. To trend of the Ghana's overall budget deficits over the period. In 2024, we were at 61 billion. 2025, again, watch this for me. It is the lowest we've had in 5 years, 2025. And that is where you've heard Professor Bokpin and others say the discipline that the government has shown is partly the reason why we're seeing the economic gains. 39.7 billion deficit. It's the lowest we've seen in a long, long time, since 2020. And there's a reason why you're seeing the benefits. Because if you spend within your means, which is likely what this is, yes, it's a deficit nonetheless, but if you compare it to the rest of the years, it tells you that something was happening. And if anything was here, and was very clear to me that he's going to cut. He wants to spend in areas of growth. He doesn't want to spend to consume. And that, he says, he's going to hold that line, and he doesn't want to be popular among his colleagues. That's a very powerful statement indeed. He said it right here. He doesn't want to be popular among his colleagues. He wants to be popular with the Ghanaian people, and so he's going to cut. In 2026, however, he's going to spend 64.2 billion more. Now, his argument is he's going to spend this to grow the economy. So he's spending on big push to create 800,000 jobs, he says. So this is not just spending on consumption. It's spending that you can track its direct benefits as far as the economy is concerned. I will ask the technical advisor to the Finance Ministry, who's joined us pretty shortly, to net this for me. What is the guarantee that this will produce and yield the benefits that we expect? So that, just to give you context. Now, if you also look at the financing 2026 budget in terms of the deficit, where are we going to get it from? IMF, World Bank, bilateral partners will chip in. And then we're also expecting treasury bills and revival of the domestic bonds. And I find this part interesting. The finance minister talks about smart borrowing. Yes, he's going to go there, but he's going to ease himself in, ease the country into the domestic bonds market slowly. Overall, government is going to reduce its borrowing as far as the domestic market is concerned, so that there'll be more funds available for banks to lend to private businesses. That is something that I'll ask the banks and the business players when we sit down for a conversation. But again, we want to track where government is putting its money. And one of the things that fascinates us is that if you look at the top areas, education is clearly miles off when it comes to its allocation. That signals where government's priority is. What government priority is 29.2 billion, and that 39.2 billion. And part of the things that you see here with this particular part of the budget is also that they're spending hugely on education. Part of it is also now going to fund the agri sector and buy the produce that our farmers produce across the country, because schools across the country, both basic and senior high school level, part of this 39.2 billion will go to buying the grains that our farmers produce. So a ready market there. So he has a huge amount of money. Part of it hugely is going to feed the schools, but also going to provide a ready market for our farmers. This is something that the farmers will join us and talk about on the show. You have health, second, with 22 billion. It tells you again where the focus is: education and health, right? And the government is going to build hospitals. It's been factored into this. Government is going to obviously build schools. It's been factored in schools across the board: kindergarten, junior, senior high schools. The finance minister told us that last week. Interior Ministry and Defense. Remember, we are dealing with a lot of challenges when it comes to defense and the question about interior with the illegal mining. So NIMOS has been allocated some funds here, and all that is sitting within this bit here. But we also need to retool our military on the back of the recent collapse, crash of the helicopter that killed so many of our folks. The government is putting some money here. I'm curious to see how this compares to previous years. But clearly the top four shows you where government is putting its money. And then you see the key policy initiatives and where the money is going, ending double track. Again, you see that reflected in education, 1 billion put there. Farmer services, again, government is putting its money into agriculture with this. So this tells you clearly where government is putting its money. NIMOS, I talked about 150 million there. 24-hour economic flagship is 110. The question then is this enough? Remember that part of this is also going to come from the private sector, right? So how much of this is going to come in, and is this enough to ensure that it takes off? And then Agenda 111, which is a controversial bit, the government accused of abandoning it. The finance minister says, no, we haven't. We are going to be doing it gradually so we don't spread ourselves thinly. Now, farmer service centers, which is 4,000 agri machinery to be provided to farmers. The farmers will join me for their take on this. You have 800,000 new jobs to be created if the budget is implemented successfully. That's what the finance minister is hoping. And then you have 10,000 staff to be recruited. And that was part of the bargaining when the government engaged the organized labor that they're going to be employing. So you need to also factor that in terms of what that will mean for the wage bill and for the compensation. So 9% is what they agreed on. And then you have the 2026 budget looking at the exchange rate stability. It's key. How is government going to work towards stability of the city? Currently, we have a significant appreciation of the city. It's the reason why you've seen this ripple effect on inflation, etc. Government says to do a few things. One, we are going to have the gold bar supporting this with all the exports. You're going to have the repatriation of export proceeds to commercial banks. That is very important. Controlling the repatriation process. In the past, that wasn't the case. Introduction of a new forex operations policy is key, but also unifying this situation that we've had in the past where you have a huge discrepancy between what the BOG is quoting and what the market is quoting. But then this is a big part of the announcement that goes directly to deal with the glut that we're talking about. Remember, the finance minister was reading the budget with the context of the glut in grains, and this was then announced. And last week when the farmers joined me, they make a point. The government has the market, and government can use this muscle to create a market for local farmers. And that has been announced. I want to hear the thoughts of the farmer groups who are joining me for a conversation tonight. Stay with me for a conversation. We're going to get a verdict of marketplace on the back of the budget that was read last week and how that impacts on your pocket directly. Because the businesses obviously run in a way that you interact with them at that level, myself included. If they give us a verdict, we need to then weigh very, directly how that then affects our individual pockets, jobs that they will create, the cost of what they put out there and sell, cost of living, all of that here on PM Express after this. And thanks for staying with us here on PM Express. I have assembled a few business leaders to talk about the budget tonight and then see how that affects all of us, those who engage with the businesses. And my guest joining me pretty shortly, but Syntax Tanks brings you PM Express. It's also brought to you by a Pepsi and Cavity Fighter and Academic Times newspaper. And if you're looking for a tank to store water, you must know that Syntax Tanks is the tank. You're looking for the tortoise on that tank that is a stamp of quality. If you can't find it on it, then you know that you are buying the wrong tank. It is strong, it is tough. Also, you need to wait and look out for the Academic Times magazine, which is coming pretty shortly, to make sure that all the work that is produced by our students across the country in the tertiary level are noticed, and indeed one that government can use. So, and that is one of the ways to ensure that the brain power that our students are working with is something that we can apply to policy. Look out for it when they launch it. And then tonight before you sleep, look out for Pepsi and Cavity Fighter, because that is the way to guarantee stronger teeth, because as you're eating today, a lot has been stuck in between your teeth, and that can cause tooth decay and gum disease even, and foul breath. And so get Pepsi and Cavity Fighter to guarantee stronger white teeth. My guest joining me for a conversation tonight is, as you know already, we have a few individuals and business leaders who joined us last week. Mark Bedu-Abuaje is the CEO of the Ghana National Chamber of Commerce and Industry. He's joining us. Joseph Obeng is the president of the Ghana Union of Traders Association, GUTA, is with me. Dr. Tue Champon is a technical advisor at the Finance Ministry. Is with me in the studio. Bismarck Owusu-Norte is executive director of the Peasant Farmers Association. He's also with me. Professor Bokwing is with me too. He's an economist and professor of finance at the University of Ghana Business School. Thank you, gentlemen, for your time here on PM Express. I want to start with one of the big ticket items in the budget, because that directly affects all businesses, and that has to do with the VAT reforms that the finance minister announced. Now, a few things that we know happened. The COVID-19 levy was scrapped as part of this. The threshold was also increased to 750,000 and a host of other interventions, but it's a holistic restructuring of VAT. As you said already, the effective VAT rate is now dropped to 20%. I want to get the take of the business leaders with me. Mr. Obeng, let me start with you. This was one of the main expectations for you going in there. You wanted to wait and hear the specifics. You've heard it. Did it meet your expectation?
Let me first of all take advantage to thank the government for its intended, because the budget itself have a lot of good intentions, and one among them is the establishment, the intended establishment of the Women's Bank. In fact, it's coming to solve a problem for us. Seriously, our women are very vulnerable, and then they normally do not do business with the mainstream banks, and they do their business with the microfinance and the SUSU systems and all manner of credits that they secure at a very extortive price that make them wallow in poverty, because they can actually not even pay the interest and all that. So government have done well, but as we are thanking government for that, we also want to appeal to government that some of our men are as weak as the women. Some of them.
So you want a men's bank?
So, no, it's not that at all. So we should find a way to also tie them up somewhere, and those people, vulnerable ones, to also get something. And so we thank government for that.
On the VAT?
When it comes to the VAT...
The reforms you saw?
Yeah. So generally, government made efforts to reform the VAT system, first and foremost by reducing the COVID levy from it.
In fact, they've abolished it completely.
Yeah. And then also the straight line levy that were creating a lot of problems for industries and the major importers and all that. What is going to do is to help importation to at least be minimized with that reduction. And then also for major wholesalers and then the supermarket structures, the more formalized businesses, they also have the respite, especially when the straight levy has been removed, and then the threshold, the VAT rate has also reduced significantly, 20%. Some people would have wished that it has come down, but at least it's better than before. But when it comes to the informal sector, that's where we have a great deal of challenge.
Okay.
Seriously, we have a challenge because the tax has, as it is, if it is, it start working at the market, it's going to segregate the market entirely.
You're talking about the VAT registration threshold?
Yes, but the threshold, it means that it's going to take more people out of the VAT payment.
That's good, isn't it?
Yeah, it's good. But it should have been uniform for all, for the informal sector where we belong, the people in Abusukai. It's a geographical area. It's the same vicinity that we trade in. So it shouldn't be that segment of the traders are not paying VAT, where other segment is paying, and then also paying, because the tax now is not, the tax rate now is not even affordable, and it's not even close to the zero that other people will not be paying. But we used to pay 4% at those enclaves, and now we are going to pay 20%. That is quite significant, very huge. And that you are competing with the same people trading in the same commodity lines, and then one segment is going to pay the VAT, whilst others are not going to pay at all. So
your preference was that
the uniformity that
the informal sector should not pay at all?
Yeah, fortunately, Ghana Revenue Authority with this have introduced a new tax system, the modified tax system, that also go in the line of the flat rate of 3% at the end of the year on your turnover. So if government will be bold and then give it to the informal sector, in those people trading in the same commodity and the same geographical area and all that, then the uniformity that we are talking about is assured. Because the consumer has his own discretion. There's no compulsion whatsoever for people to go and buy from VAT-registered people. And so, naturally, the consumer will go and seek for the person who is not registered to charge the VAT and buy from him. So, by so doing, we are the one who has charged is victimized. And we are talking about the threshold translates into 2,400 Ghana cedis per day. If you average it by the 365 and you take the the weekends from it. So 2,400, it means that the person who is charging, who is being exempted from paying was having sales of 2,400. The person who is selling beyond 2,500 per day is also being made to pay the... the tax shouldn't be discriminative. And in this particular instant, it has become very discriminative. If it starts working.
Okay.
It means that a chunk of us are not going to pay, and then a chunk of us are going to also pay. And how are we? It doesn't ensure compliance.
Okay.
You see, uniformity ensures compliance. Affordability ensures compliance. And this is what we have been talking about. We were paying flat rate of 4%. Those who were in the supermarkets and all that, the more formalized people who were paying 21.9 have gotten some kind of reduction to 20%, and we are moving from 4% to 20%. Definitely, for somebody to charge VAT at Mankasim Market, Tachima Market, Opera Square, KJTR, and all that for 20%, we have to think about, because
let me run it by
the flat rate.
The
flat rate of 4% did not come. The reason why continuously we've been charging flat rate at those informal places is because of certain things like the input VAT that were being a challenge and all that. And that's why consistently they have been making us pay. And it made people also learn how to pay their taxes. Then if we take them all out, it's also going to suppress growth, because people are deliberately going to take themselves out because they say that they don't belong to the threshold. The confusion to determine who qualifies to be under threshold, because then everybody will want to be under the threshold.
So that's an important point that I'll get Theo's take on. How do you determine who meets that threshold? Mark Meduabaje, talk to me about the Chamber's point of view on the VAT as it relates to your members.
Well, thank you. Largely, this has been one of our major concerns for the past 3 to 4 years. And in all the budgets, one of our major inputs is for the VAT to be reformed. So we were happy when last year was announced that we're going to see a reformation and possibly a reduction in the effective VAT rate. Unfortunately, it took almost a year. And then just this budget, you've seen that it's actually been reformed. So we are happy about it. I think one of our major issues, our major problems have been resolved for us.
Specifically, how does it impact your members?
Well, so for our members, our complaint largely was that it was so complex. I mean, it's a VAT that you see the standard VAT being combined with straight line levies. In fact, the computation itself was a challenge for most of our members. So some of them, it's not that they don't want to pay, but how to even compute it was a challenge. Now, we have said that the straight line levy was translating into a direct cost to the businesses. So you see a direct cost of the one we pay for the NHIL, the one we pay for the GET Fund, and also the almighty COVID levy. These are levies that you cannot claim an input VAT on. So it became a direct cost to businesses. Now that we have consolidated, it is part of the standard VAT. Now becomes a VAT that a business person can also claim an input VAT. So it doesn't become a direct cost to businesses again. So there we are going to have a relief in there, and how it will affect prices we're going to discuss. Secondly, now it's simplified. So when you pay your 20%, you know how to calculate your output VAT, your input VAT, and how to do your deduction. And the ones that you have to pay to government, obviously you have to also pay to government. For consumers, there's going to be a direct relief just by moving from 21.9 to the 20%. That one has nothing to do with the businesses, because it's only when they sell to you that they calculate and put the effective VAT of 21.9. Now, with the hypothetical case that you did with 1,000, that difference is a direct benefit to a consumer. So if this VAT is implemented, if you go through Parliament and it's implemented, then obviously consumers are going to see that impact, straightforward, because you buy, instead of charging you VAT on that particular product of 21.9, now they are charging you 20%. And per your calculation, it's about 19 per your hypothetical
Yeah,
case.
if you're using 1,000, if it's 1,000 cedis. Yeah.
If you use 1,000, it's about 19 cedis. And as you said, the more you consume vatable products, the more you also benefit. But for businesses, we now are now going to look at the effect of moving from this levies that were translated into direct costs into now a VAT that you can claim input, and see how you're going to compute and look at the effects and how we can translate some of these benefits also to consumers. So the simplification for me is one of the highest points. The fact that you have reversed the decoupling of the NHIL and also the GET fund and the almighty COVID levy. I think we have cried over this for years, that the moment WHO declared that COVID is not a pandemic, and mind you, Ghana was the only country that charged COVID levy, and we're still charging after COVID. So now that is out, it also translates into direct benefit to the consumer and to businesses. So they have listened to us, and we are happy about. I share the view of Prof.
And the threshold, the question on the threshold, they're increasing the threshold to 750,000.
Yes, I also share the concern of Mr. Obeng. Now, largely, looking at the nature of our businesses, a number of businesses are going to be taken away from the payment of VAT. And the nature of our market are such that you have someone paying VAT sitting next to someone not paying. For a consumer, aside from quality, is also looking at affordability. So if I go and let's say Mr. Obeng's, just for an example, Mr. Obeng's company is charging VAT because it's above the threshold, and I have a smaller one who probably would have gone to Mr. Obeng to go and take a product and is selling. And because it's not charging VAT, the quality may be the same. He is able to sell at a lower price. Obviously, I'll be gravitating towards the one charging a lower price. I think there should have been a more broader discussion on this particular threshold. The idea is that the smaller businesses will also grow to a level where they will also get to 750,000, and now will be able to pay the VAT. For what level? How are we monitoring their progress from where they are now to a level where they will get to 750? Who is doing that? And at what point are they also going to charge? So that discrimination is still there. And the movement also from the 4% to 21%, for a typical business, the larger one that will pay the 21.9% as effective VAT rate is beneficial to them, because of the reasons I have enumerated. For somebody who is just jumping, if the person will not have an input VAT to be able to subtract or deduct, then if you are not careful, it becomes a disadvantage to that particular businesses. Largely, for me, it's a good start. But now that the concerns are coming up, I think we should be open-minded and listen to the businesses and see how going forward we'll be able to resolve them.
Okay.
My issue, again, has to do with the optimal effective VAT rate that Prof has been talking about. I share with him totally that if you want to have this positive impact of the reduction in VAT on consumers and on producers, I was also expecting that at least we do the optimal 18%. That would have translated into an instant benefit that everybody can feel. Now that people know that the VAT rate has been reduced from 21.9 to 20%, you've had people even call in and say that, when are you reducing your prices?
Yeah.
Because they know that the VAT is gone down. But the price calculation is quite a bit technical. It might not necessarily take just the reduction in VAT to reduce prices, but it may have some minimal impact. We are also looking at how the benefits of all this macroeconomic stability will also translate into a very conducive business environment. As it stands now, those stability positive, how they are impacting other key indicators of production or cost of production is what we are looking at. Because for inflation to be 8%, we are looking at how it will translate into a lower policy rate and a lower lending rate.
And I'll come to the lending rate. I'll come to the lending because I see some policies in the budget that really attempts to address that fundamentally. But Dr. Toye Champong, first of all, give me your quick. You've heard the two business leaders talk about they like it, overall positive, but then that small issue with the
a few design issues, and I think for me, look, I like the candor that they've both brought to the conversation. When you're designing and implementing tax systems, often we are guided by four, call it canons, right? It goes all the way back to Adam Smith. A system has got to be efficient. A tax system has got to be efficient. It's got to be equitable. It's got to be transparent, and it's got to be easy to administer. Currently, when you take the VAT system as we have in Ghana, per all the studies and all the assessment that we have done within the ministry and other independent bits of work, clearly it fails on several of these benchmarks. So something had to be done in terms of the reform. And this reform has been long coming. I am sure both of them have been arguing for changes for, God knows, the last 5, 6 or so, years. So really what it's trying to do is to, like the gentleman said, reduce the rate down. The effective rate comes down from 21.9 to 20. The regional average VAT within the African region is around 18%. However, given that you also have fiscal issues and revenue issues to address, you cannot bring that down straight away just like that, right? It's a graduated process. And if you listen carefully to the minister on his rounds, he actually does echo that point as well, that, okay, this is a step in the right direction, and then come subsequent budgets, once we've had a chance to look at the numbers, it will be possible to accommodate even a further reduction in the numbers. Effectively, what you're doing per the numbers and what's been done is you're putting as much as through the combined effect of these reforms, close to about 6 billion, right, directly into the pocket of everyday Ghanaians. I do get the point that Mr. Obin has raised, that for his subsector, the informal and the traders, there are issues there with the design that has to be addressed. So
one of the fundamental question he asks is, how do you determine who meets the threshold?
So
you must have a very effective monitoring system.
Part of the work. So we're actually going to be using, if you read the budget, there's talk of what is called the fiscal electronic devices, right? So these are basically your POS systems, the software systems.
But I know a market, our informal sector, they don't use that at all.
I have gone to other informal markets around in Africa here, from Kenya to Zambia. I've actually traveled around quite a bit.
But we're talking about Ghana. I get frustrated when, now we don't like using money.
You do the Momo transfer.
Momo transfer, yes.
And
that they will accept. But POS...
yes, for some segment of the market, other segment, no. But the point I'm trying to make is that he's raised a valid concern, right? And we would have to sit down with them or his group to find a way of addressing that point. The tricky bit with all these reforms or policy issues is you have to look at the big picture. The big picture being that businesses collectively were complaining. The VAT was a disincentive to investment. Given the cost of business and other issues, the inflation and all of that, something had to be done about that. And that reduction is directly putting money right into the pockets of Ghanaians. For a segment, yes, there are issues with the design and the administration that has to be tweaked. But if you look at the big picture, and even the rollout of the electronic devices that I did mention, again, you look at the evidence base from Ethiopia to Zambia to Tanzania. Collectively, in 10 to 12 years since these devices have been rolled out, the evidence is clear. You see an increase in the revenues on the side of the government, but you also get less distortions in terms of the implementation of the tax. And that is really what is guiding the policy decision that, we've seen here. So really, it's about tightening the base and having scrapped some of those funny levies that were there that was, complicating the computation, and now making it a straightforward, right, tax calculation. Ultimately, you pass a lot more back to the consumers. And you can also claim the input VAT on it. And yes, he does raise, valid concerns about his segment of the market. But if you look at the big aggregate picture, which is really what drives some of these policy decisions, it's going to be a collective benefit for Ghanaians.
And Professor Bokpin, what's your verdict on this VAT restructuring that was announced by the Finance Minister?
Well, thank you very much, and good evening to my seniors. Dr. Tia Champong, good evening, everyone. So, yes, I think it's a welcome development. These were all part of the reforms that we have called for over the years, and I want to commend government for listening to not only businesses to academics. I actually don't operate any business, but I try to understand how businesses are impacted by the tax regime and all of that. I mean, what we've seen, especially with the decoupling, was essentially combining VAT with sales tax. And we know that sales tax, typically we moved away from that with the introduction of VAT because that is a bit more counterproductive and anti-growth. But the understanding is that VAT is growth friendly, especially when the rates do not go beyond 18%, because once it goes beyond that, that is, then I'm also happy because as the business people who are on the ground have indicated, now it's been consolidated. We were expecting that they peg the standard VAT rate at around 18%. And our reasons were, one, we were talking about 24-hour economy and accelerated export development program. Then it means that you need to create a tax environment that is more growth friendly. And growth friendly because growth can also be driven from consumption point of view because the end result of production is consumption and all of that. But then again, we also want to look at the structure of our economy. We want to look at development challenges. Currently, we are talking about inequality at around 44%. So with that high inequality rate, if we should measure that by Gini, we are talking about something close to 44%. Typically, once your inequality threshold is above 10%, it's counterproductive. So if you have that high level of inequality, your VAT rate should not be high. It tends to worsen the inequality. Then we're also talking about poverty that is around 25.9% per the World Bank data. So if you put all of this data together to the extent that we have 13.5 million Ghanaians that are food insecure and all of that, looking at food prices and all of that. And then again, we're also saying that between 42 to 44% of household expenditure is on food and all of that. Okay, so if you put all of these things together, then if you put the standard VAT rate at 20%, then it's a bit too high. But I understand where government is coming from, and I agree with Dr. Tua Champ on that. It's a starting point. And I am mindful that probably in the next year or so, the minister himself had indicated that next year or so, they will review it. Then again, you also want to look at regional balance, okay, because we are not an island. We are talking about the African Continental Free Trade. The standard VAT rate across our regional peers and structural peers, you'll find it around 18%. Of course, Nigeria has 7.5%, but among states, they have their own different kind of taxes. If you cumulate it, you will see that it's a little higher, but that's 7.5. But if you talk about Cote d'Ivoire, you can talk about 18%. Kenya is actually around 16% or so, and all of that. So among our regional peers and our structural peers, that is the direction where they are going. But for now, I think that we understand government. We thought that could have been better, but the minister had indicated the reasons why.
And then also give me your thoughts on the registration threshold, the increase to 750,000. There are a few questions there. How do you identify that? It's also discriminatory. and what measures you're going to put in place to ensure that indeed the person who is saying my threshold is 750,000 is indeed 750,000.
Yeah, so look, Evans, I agree with Dr. Chia Champon, when you are designing a tax system, it's very difficult to meet everybody equally and all of that. You see that when you talk to those who are covered within the threshold, they'll be so excited that they are exempted and all of that. These are micro, small, and all of that. But I think that before this, we should have a threshold about 250,000, right? But that base has been eroded because of inflation, price development over the years and all of that. So what the minister has sought to do is to increase it so that the very small ones are actually exempt. Not only just that exempt, but the intricacies of calculating and remitting and all of that it becomes a bit burdensome for micro, small, and the rest of them and all of that. But I think I also agree with Dr. Chia Champon that this is something that they can look at and all of that. But given where we have come from, it's very difficult to have a system that meets everybody's expectation equally, but there will be some trade-offs here and there. But then again, we also have to look at the implementation and make sure that those who actually qualify within the threshold are actually charging that. And then as we also begin to also formalize the market going forward. I also agree with the idea of deploying POS, especially in the informal sector. I think we have come this far. We do know, Evans, we do know that there are businesses at the retail level, some even at the wholesale level, that actually deduct this VAT and actually don't remit it to GRA.
Yeah.
We know. We know. And all
so
of that.
that's a challenge there.
And that is why, Evans, you realize that if you look at the disaggregation of our GDP, for instance, retail and wholesale contribute close to 16% to our GDP, yet the tax contribution from that sector is less than 5%. That
has been a challenge over the past, bringing in the informal sector into the tax net, and hopefully this POS rollout will deal with that. There's another part of this conversation I want to take my guests to, because it came up last week in the conversation, access to credit. And I want to bring in Bismarck into that conversation now, because I know over the time we spoke, the farmers, one of the key things was access to credit, not only banks making the credit available to them, but also cheaply, and also patient capital was those three things. First, access, affordability, and whether indeed it's one that is patient to allow them to put the money in and make it back so that they can pay. And Bismarck, I want to come to you on that point as far as the budget is concerned. I see in the budget that the finance minister announced that first, going into 2026, government borrowing will reduce. And he said that, and then linked it to, if that happens, the expectation is the bank should have more money than to lend to the private sector. And if that happens, banks should be less risk averse. And then you also then have the knock-on effect of lending to productive sectors. And just to quote that part, I just wanted to break it down. But in essence, as private sector, Mr. Speaker, private sector credit is expected to grow. So that's the finance minister telling us his expectations next year. It's expected to grow in 2026 and improve steadily over the medium term. As government's domestic financing needs ease, banks are expected to lower risk aversion, expand lending to productive sectors, obviously agric is one, and support small businesses. Give me your reaction to this. This is an indication of what the government wants to be by the end of 2026.
Well, thank you very much. And let me say a big good evening to my seniors on the panel. Yeah, I think that last week we spoke about the fact that lending or access to credits and patient capital has been one of the biggest challenges that we face as farmers especially. And I remember me quoting the fact that if you are doing a comparison of the interest rate that we pay in Ghana as compared to our neighbors within the sub-region, we are doing more than 90% or so of what they are doing. So if there is a plan for government to ensure that businesses, especially the lending institutions, have mechanisms and an environment where they are able to reduce the interest that they charge I think it's something that should be welcomed. For us, we've made a point that for agriculture to be lucrative and for the fact that we want to encourage persons to take credit, we need to have a regime where credit is extremely, extremely low. In fact, we even made a case that we want a situation where farmers can borrow at a rate that is single digits. That's the case that we've been making. We've been looking for an avenue, and sometimes we feel that even the introduction or the creation of the Women's Bank should also create that avenue for us. So for us, if all these mechanisms are put in place, but it doesn't translate into lower rates, it doesn't translate into a system where we can have long-term financing for agricultural interventions, then I think that there's still some additional work that government needs to do. For now, we are just hopeful that whatever system that government puts in place is a system that ensures that the businessman or the average farmer can easily walk out to any institution and take a credit that he or she has very flexible repayment terms and also have rates that are much more competitive as compared to what our neighbors are also getting. So that's my take on those particular...
On the credit. And Theo, break that down for me. The part of the budget I read gives us the broad policy objective, which is reduce government borrowing on the domestic level. That also frees the bank up to have more money to play and to give credit to Mr. Obeng and Bismarck and co. But in specific...
wants 5%.
Specifically, though, what are the targets and how do you plan to do that? Because you still need money, because you're going to spend... You have a significant budget deficit that you need to still break. Part of the ways you want to do that is also do treasury bills, right? The minister has said, I want to go back into domestic borrowing, but I want to ease myself in. So you're still going to borrowing. So square that circle for me.
Oh, actually, it squares actually quite nicely. So if you look at the big numbers, right, on the revenue side, the expenditure side, the end commitment is that you're going to end the year doing a total deficit of around 4%. If you did it on a cash basis, I think it's 2.2%. And if you look at what has been achieved in 2025 year to date, so the Q1, Q2, Q3 numbers, we actually have met those targets, and even the other primary anchor for the conduct of fiscal policy, the primary surplus, right? The target is 1.5%. At the time this was being put together, I'm sure a number of my other economist colleagues would have been like, this is quite a big number, right? To actually run that kind of primary surplus. Primary surplus basically being your revenue minus your spending, but you don't include your interest payments, the borrowing and all of that, right, on that. So basically, if you look at the numbers that we've got year to date, and you do the analysis, and then you look at what the projections are for 2026, I'm quite confident that we actually would meet those deficit numbers, and then the deficit numbers ultimately translate into the borrowing plan that the government has got. And it is one also the key anchors, right, that market watchers will be looking at, right? Because again, remember that in May, we're going to come out of the IMF program, and everybody is going to be looking at, okay, your program is going to come to an end. Are we going to be able to stick to the fiscal consolidation path that, as a country, we've set for ourselves?
And quickly draw the linkage to credit for me, because one, it was accessible,
so the credit link is pretty straightforward. Like you said, if the government is not borrowing as much as it wants, necessarily that money would not sit on the books of the banks. They have to find somewhere else to do, right? In days past, what most of banks and other commercial institutions would just do is go and buy government paper, treasury bill, wait 90 days, 180 days, or 1 year, and then get a return on that, right? If you say that you've communicated to the market that this is the amount of borrowing that you're going to need, and you stick to that plan, then the excess money that would otherwise have come to the government to finance its operations, we need to go somewhere else. And that is where they will start actually chasing the likes of Mr. Obeng and the Ghana Chamber of Commerce, right, to come and get those credits. But of course, it's also linked to the inflation dynamics, right? So the Bank of Ghana, in the conduct of its policy instruments, right, would have to push to see, okay, is there room or scope to further even reduce the policy rate down? And I think, yes, there's possibly room for the policy rate to even come, further down, and that would translate into lower cost of credit, which is really what everybody wants.
In terms of projections, though, before I bring Mr. Obin into the picture, where do you envision that interest rates will be as far as the lending rates are concerned?
Difficult to tell from where I sit, and also
because it's currently around 20%.
It's around the 20-ish%. Yeah. Inflation now is around 8%. Some forecasts I've seen independently, and then of course you can look at the inflation target in the budget as well. Could 2026 come further down? So I think, look, if the inflation goes further down, definitely the central bank would, cut back on the policy rate. Where that would come to is at the discretion of the Monetary Policy Committee.
Mr. Obin, on that question of credit, you started by talking about the Women's Bank, which is they've been funded now to start, but then you also need credit. Yeah. You need it available, and you need it cheaply. He's just been explaining that they have a blueprint to force the banks to have more liquidity that they can then give to you and bring this thing now. He hasn't given us a sort of target, but at least the broad plan there. Do you have confidence in what you've heard? That in the next 1 year, when you go to the bank, say next year by this time, you're going to borrow cheaply?
Yeah, if you look at a trend, where were you coming from?
We're 35.
We're paying 35% and above, and now it has come. Only yesterday I asked my bank, and then I was happy. The rate that
what rate was they quoting? But I don't know your bank. So you can tell me.
You remember when Dr.
Yes, the president of the bank association.
It averages around 90 to 20%.
Yes.
I said, my people are they giving me this? Well, for the first time I called them, what is my rate? And then they gave me.
Did it confirm the Johnny was?
It was little above, but I was
above the policy.
But that was the average you mentioned. So mean that their banks are actually charging 19%.
Exactly. From whereby I believe the Bank of Ghana needs some mechanism that will close up the gap between the reference rate and then the commercial lending rate. We have to do something now. The inflation is down. Bank of Ghana main reason for mopping up excess liquidity as a way to bring down inflation was the level of inflation at that time. And now if the inflation is down, at this time we should be able to make some, because 8% for inflation and then 25% and thereabout and all that. So we can still bridge it up a little more. But going forward, whilst they are promising that inflation will even go further down, I believe that it will also trickle down the interest rate. Because if we're able to do that for the mainstream banks to lend at an affordable rate, then we do not even fall on the government to come and assist. So the economic indicators are getting better. And I have a great hope that if it persists, definitely it will bring the commercial rates down, and then everybody can borrow.
That's a significant vote of confidence.
But let me tell you one thing also. Sometimes we are not reinventing the wheels.
Absolutely.
We want access to credit, and other countries have done that. For traders and for manufacturers, they need a specialized fund. Right. Deliberate effort by government to provide a fund. Sometimes something like a parallel bank that will compel the commercial banks to come down. Otherwise, they feel so comfortable in their space. And so, if you look at the Exim Bank arrangement in Turkey, India, and elsewhere, what government have done, the various governments have done, is to create a fund for both the manufacturer and then the distributor, the importer like myself. So because what they've done is that they want people to come and buy the goods that are made in their countries. So they established this fund, and that they will secure the credit and then give the benefit to me. So they will secure, I give my invoice to...
So it's like a typical export credit facility.
Exactly. So
Right.
they give to me 120 days and all that. So we are even able to assess this kind of credit from... Why can't government do same here? Where they have a fund, a credit pool for manufacturers, you assess and give it to your distributor. It's so simple. So the distributors, if it is 120 days, we pay to the manufacturer and then he pay back to the pool. It's a tripod scheme. And we have actually even proposed it to government that if they do that, most of us will not travel out there to go and buy. Because most of us, because of the access to affordable credit, we feel very comfortable getting suppliers credit. And it comes with no fee.
And
they give us about 180
it's a very important point. And I know you want to come, but I want to bring in industry because he's talking about that linkage there. Mark, give me your thoughts on this and how the budget attempts to deal with the credit challenge.
Well, I think that with the consolidation, there shouldn't be any reason why the policy rate should stay at where it is.
Exactly.
Looking at the numbers, the policy rate, interest rate, they are all derived rates. That depends on a number of factors. So if those factors are improving, for instance,
I mean, something we just interrupted him there. Yes, Theo, you wanted to say something very quickly before I go back to him.
Yeah,
Hello?
no,
Yeah, he's back. He's back. Okay. Yes. We lost you briefly. Mark, please proceed.
Okay. So what I'm saying is that the lending rate is a derived rate. Depends on a number of factors, inflation, exchange rate. So once you've seen positive signs, with inflation at 8%, CD appreciating more than 34.9%, and all other variables, I expect that the policy rate should also trend downwards.
Exactly.
Now, if a lending rate is 19%, as John Ewa said the last time, then the policy rate of 21.5% is misplaced, in that the policy rate is supposed to be the minimum rate that even the banks will borrow from the central banks and be adding their whatever cost and other risks to it. It means that there is something fundamentally wrong with the position of the policy rate now. It's sending a signal that the policy rate should even be lowered around 15%. If indeed the lending rate is 19%, the policy rate should even be lower up to lowered to 15%. So when they add their cost and they add their risk profile, then you get to the 19. But for a policy rate at 21%, it means that there is some misalignment somewhere that the central bank will have to take a critical look at. So I agree. We've seen some downward trend in the lending rate. I'm hopeful. We've had instances where we go to 10 and the areas like that. So I'm hopeful that the policy rate will come down, and that will also send a strong signals to the bank. Even with that high level, they are still giving low. But one critical thing for businesses, especially for manufacturing companies, is not just the rate, the cost of credit, but also the term of the funding.
That's your word.
Our banking industry is structured in such a way that they are so obsessed with giving short-term, maximum 1 year. If you want to go into long-term manufacturing, that 1 year will not be sufficient. So you need about 2 to 3 years to set up your machines, import and fix and all those things. By 1 year, you will not even start production for you to be making revenue to be able to pay for the loan. So we have instances where those who really want to manufacture, they will borrow short to finance long-term projects. And because of that, they are not able to pay. And the banks will also have a very high non-performing loans. And non-performing loans will also feed into the cost of credit. So some vicious cycle going on that technically we need to look at. I agree that we need to set up a specific funding for specific sectors of the economy. With this high interest rate, you don't expect that a manufacturing company will be profitable, even borrowing at the 19% we are talking about. Those countries that intentionally developed the industrial sector decided that you are going to support you with a specific funding at a lower rate.
I mean, you make that point, and I just can't help myself refer to the Agri-Development Bank. That was the concept behind Agri-Development Bank, so that it then gives NIB was also there,
now,
right?
They've all turned into they were development banks. They've
Yes.
turned into commercial
Banks, yes.
And now they are competing with other commercial banks on profitability, because you are not assessing them based on their contribution to the development of the economy, but they are assessing them based on their profitability. So you go and they are ranking banks, you look at your deposit, you look at your profit. So the banks themselves will also want to show good numbers. So they will move from being a development bank to becoming a commercial bank.
Yeah,
and the commercial banks are...
Yeah, and Mark, hold on for me. I need to get Prof's quick take on the point you made about what you seem to suggest there's a misalignment there between the policy rate and where the commercial rates are. As we've heard from Johnny Watt, Prof, what's your guess? What's happening there? If it is around the policy rate is above 20, and the president of the Bankers Association, Johnny Watt, who was here, chief executive, was here last week, said their average, in fact, you were on the show, you heard him, 19%. What account for this misalignment?
Yeah, I agree with Dr. Makbedu and then the others. Certainly, we feel that the policy rate has not responded in the same way that the other rates have. But again, it comes down to the aggressive strengthening of the currency, right? And as the central banks all over the world are a bit more conservative in lowering their rates, right? They want to be sure that all the parameters are a bit more entrenched and all of that, but that is where we are now. If you look at the factors that go into the Ghana reference rates, you realize that the treasury bill rate, which is accorded almost close to 40% or so, has done 8 parts. But the interbank rate is also linked closely to the policy rate. So the interbank rate is still very high, and then also the policy rate is still very high. It's the reason why you haven't seen the Ghana reference rate come down significantly relative to inflation. And simply also because it's not just, I think that, well, we are talking about the rate, but the other bit we should also be talking about is the composition of lending to the private sector. Where should it go? Currently, it's overly concentrated in the service sector, trade and all of that. Okay, so if you look at the percentage that goes to agriculture, it's very, very small. So it's not just that the rates must come down, but we must also be interested in where the credit is actually going. What is it that is funding and all of that, and how that is aligned with our economic orientation and all of that. So you can see that there has been considerable pressure on the central bank to ease the policy rate. So if you see the last 2 MPC meetings, the rate of reduction, you can't see that in a lot of serious countries. For a central bank at a goal to bring the policy rate down by, let's say, 350 basis points or so, it's simply because the gap is very wide. And we can see the misalignment not only in terms of the policy rate, the ultimate lending rate, and if you see where inflation is right now, clearly the gap is just too wide. What it also means is that whilst we were putting pressure on other players in the market to bring down their rates, we forgot that the central bank had to also respond. If they also believe that this macroeconomic stability has come to stay and all of that, then they needed to also respond aggressively the same way that we've seen all the other rates come down. But I believe that the central bank is looking at that. Beyond just the policy rate coming down, there has to be some reversal as well. We realize that just to prop up the value of the cedi, the central bank has mopped up too much liquidity from the system. In excess of 250 billion Ghana cedis has been mopped up. So beyond the rate coming down, we need to make the liquidity also available. Again, you can see, so it's not just the fiscal side that has to drive the rate down. We also expect the monetary side to also play it role. Then we also need to free up liquidity in the market, because once there's also excess liquidity and to the extent that we believe that the stability of the currency would last for long, then that liquidity should be available, because that is all we should be, we should be looking at.
Theo, you had something quickly to say, and I'll take it.
Prof has said, right? The policy rate is really one of the key or core signals when it comes to the conduct of monetary policy, right? In this part of the world and in several other jurisdictions. The point is that when your inflation is now around 7 or 8%, right, mark. And you were coming from a very, very high position, right? So we've had a very rapid period of disinflation. And before that, you were around 20-something, almost 30% on the policy rate. Typically, central banks don't cut that big. Occasionally, you would see 0.25 basis points, so half of a quarter of a percent, right? And things like that. So I think we just need to give the central bank a little bit of room to, in the next rate cycling period, I think it's going to be towards the end of the month, the MPC is going to meet. And then they will look at all of the, call it parameters. But the important thing is whatever figure or number the central bank comes down to in terms of the policy rate, it is a strong signal of where we think inflation expectations, right, are also going to be. And that also links to how credit becomes available to the market. So I think the signals are positive. Let's give it a bit of time and let them do what they've got to do, the MPC, do their own independent assessment, and then come down to the number that they want to get to. And then it was just a quick point I just wanted to add, just on the non-performing loans. Yes, the figure is high, but actually I was just looking at just the last September statistics that the central bank published. And if you look at it on a year-by-year basis, so in August of 2024, that was 24.3%. It's actually dropped now in August of 25 to 20.8%. So it's actually almost like 3%, right, or 300 basis point, drop or improvement in the, non-performing loans. It does signal that something is happening. These are leading indicators to tell you, where credit is going, whether we are improving on the NPLs and all of that. But it all ties into the point that I think we're all making across the room here, that yes, more credit can be provided. Yes, the central bank can do a little bit more, but that is also subject to whatever the Monetary Policy Committee meets and decides on come December. Only a few weeks away.
I'm going to take a quick break. When I return, I'll focus a bit more on the agri sector, because there's a lot that was said in the budget that was directed at the agri sector, and the Bismarck is here to give me their verdict on that. Stay with me. And thanks for staying with us. This is PM Express, getting the verdict of the business community to the budget presented last week. My guest, Dr. Mark Bejo-Abuaje, is the CEO of Ghana National Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Joseph Obeng is the president of the Ghana Union of Traders Association, GUTA. Dr. Theo Champon is the technical advisor at the Finance Ministry. Bismarck Owusu Norte is the executive director of Peasant Farmers Association of Ghana. And Professor Godfrey Bokwe is economist and professor of finance at the University of Ghana Business School. And to you, Bismarck, the finance minister last week spent some time talking about the challenge with the agri sector and also announced far-reaching policies as far as that is concerned. Let's start with the GLAD. He's announced 200 million. I think you touched on it last week. But he's also assured you that there is now guaranteed market through the power of the public sector, with the directive that has gone to the schools to buy grains produced locally. They are also doing other things, for example, in oil palm, and putting a lot of money into the agri sector. Give me your quick verdict on that. How are farmers reacting to this?
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity. I think that, first of all, we need to commend government for the fact that when you compare what we had for this year's budget, that's the 2025 budget, and next year's budget, you could see that there have been some remarkable improvements. In fact, the fact that we've been able to pinpoint a series of agricultural interventions, and it appears that these interventions seem to address the entire value chain from production. So there's some talk about irrigation, from actual cultivation to harvesting to post-harvest and then to market access, I think that generally you could give government some credit for the fact that they've really made some improvements. However, when you look at the numbers, it appears that we still have a lot of work to do. Now, you remember for this year's budget, government allocated 1.5 billion to the agricultural sector, and that represented less than 2% of the total allocation or total government expenditure. For this year, we've seen some improvement. Now, when we did our initial computation, where we added almost all the expenditure to the agricultural sector, in addition to other interventions that have impact in the agricultural sector, we saw a huge jump to about 7.8 billion Ghana cedis going to the sector, which is very remarkable, looking at where we're coming from. But when you go deeper, the total government expenditure for 2026 is around 357 billion. So if you are just putting 7.8 billion, then we are doing just about 2.18% of allocation to agric as a percentage of the total government expenditure. So even though we have moved on from 1.5 billion this year
Oliver asked for more
to about 7.8 billion this year, we are still below our call for the 10% allocation to the sector. So that's one area that I think that maybe going forward, government needs to work much more. Now, the part that even makes it very interesting is that, you know, the major government program is the Feed Ghana program, which is going to run for the next 4 years. The Feed Ghana program actually needs around 302 billion cedis for the 4 years for it to be implemented. And government of Ghana is expected to contribute 176 billion cedis. Now, for every year, we need at least 66 billion Ghana cedis to implement the Feed Ghana program every year. So if you even take the 66 billion Ghana cedis for just 2026, as against 7 billion that is going for the whole sector, that means that for us to even implement the Feed Ghana program, we are just spending or allocating only 11% of what is needed. So that means that even though, as I earlier mentioned, there seems to be a lot of improvements and interventions, when it comes to the resource allocation, we are still not where we have to be. And I will urge that going forward, government should really pay attention to that very well. Then you spoke about NAFCO. I think on NAFCO too, we need some clarity, because when the minister read the statement, he mentioned that 200 million cedis have been allocated for NAFCO to mop up the excess rice and maize on the system. But if you check the appendix, the amount allocated to NAFCO is 105 million. So we will need clarity whether that's an error or indeed it was only 105 million Ghana cedis that was allocated to NAFCO. And also, aside the allocation, which is great, we also need to see some action on the ground. You know, last week I was telling you that we expected to see the NAFCO assigned companies on the field buying the rice. As at now, we've still not seen any action, and I think that NAFCO needs to do additional work on that. Now, let me also touch on another important area for us. That's on irrigation. You remember this year, early this year, government launched what they call the Irrigation for Wealth program. And under that particular program, the expectation is that we're supposed to have the creation or establishment of 8 major irrigation dams across 8 regions in Ghana. So the ministry deliberately selected 8 regions that do not have any major irrigation facility, with the idea that Irrigation for Wealth should take care of that particular challenge. We were told that this year was to be used for the feasibility, and then the actual implementation should commence from next year. Unfortunately, if you go to the budget, it's only 105 million Ghana cedis that are allocated for irrigation.
Okay.
And even that monies are just going to renovate existing irrigation sites and not create new ones. So those also an area that we show we need to get more updates on, and especially the fact that there was no mention of the Palugu Montepos Dam, as well as resources to rehabilitate some dams under the One Village One Dam. So I think that these are areas that government should also be looking at. Then let me touch on the purchase of the locally produced food.
Very briefly, in 30 seconds, so I can get you to respond to the questions you've asked.
Yeah, so I think that initiative is fantastic, which we welcome. Our comment is that we wish that in addition to the schools, we should have the other state institutions, like the security services, like NADMO, also being parts of this initiative. Two, we'd also wish that this is not a mere directive, but it should translate into a legislation. We want to see an act, a legislation that mandates with punitive sanctions for anyone who tries to what, who tries not to be compliant with it. Because if you're not careful, once this government moves, the different governments come, they might throw it away. And it is something that we don't want to happen. So we will encourage that we should have this directive translate into a legislation so that we know that every state institution is bound to ensure that anytime they are procuring local food, they procure to a local farmers.
Local market, and that's an important point. Until we just have a minute to wrap up, so you have briefly.
Point of clarification that he raised on the NAFCO, the national,
the
Feed Ghana, the Feed Ghana.
Okay.
So if you actually look at it, in terms of the direct budget allocations, yes, that number is there, but you've got other institutions also coming in, right, to support. So, for example, as it ties into the 24-hour economy program, there is some intervention there, and then also the likes of DBG and then the other development banks that will come in to support the government on that. So you've got to look at the bigger picture rather than just the direct line item within that, which is the government commitment, but there are other resources from other places.
And you also raise a question, the discrepancy between the buffer stock allocation of 200 million, and then you go to the appendix, you have 105
million. I have to check.
Okay. Okay. By the way, thank you very much. Mr. Obeng, I'm grateful that you came, and the Mark and Prof and Bismarck too. Now you have to go into implementation. And that's where I guess the time is.
Execution.
Exactly. That's it. So we keep an eye on that, and we'll return to this table again and have a conversation around implementation and whether they are meeting your expectations when it comes to that. Enjoy the rest of the evening.